Morning, colleagues. Naomi is one of those people who gives me yet another just follow that if you can Atkinson moment, and she's just done it again. I am the Children's Commissioner for England. I've been so since the 1st of March 2010. From the 1st of March 2015 it will be somebody else. The new law, the 2014 law, which strengthened my role in my office, has made it clear that Children's Commissioners may only serve one term, and I will have served one by the 28th of February next year. So we face a period of change, and I'm absolutely certain that there will be a strong incumbent standing here if there is this conference again next year, because the job description falls out of the Act. So they can't say, tell you what, let's give it to a retired bus driver, or they've done really well in the IT industry, why don't we make them Children's Commissioner? Because the job description is incredibly strongly drawn from the 2014 Act and its predecessor Act, the 2004 Act, which the 14 Act amended for my office. My relatively new statutory function is to promote and protect the rights of the child, with particular but not sole regard for the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is the world's most signed human rights treaty, bar none. Not the European Convention, not our Human Rights Act, not any treaty that the UN ever had signed to end a war or provide wheat or put medicine into poor areas, or the one about children. That's actually a very significant and world-leading statement for me to make. I think it's really important that the world's nations, we in 1991, under John Major's government, have signed and ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. We are also ratifying state party members of a cluster of other conventions that apply equally to children and young people. So the one on the rights of persons with disability, the one to end domestic and other violence and abuse against women and girls. We are signed up to a huge number of conventions, most of which are actually already supported by English law. So, a cook's tour of bits and pieces of the UNCRC, which is what the convention is shortened to by those of us who know the acronyms. What I say this morning is based entirely on the work that my office does, and you will find anything I refer to on my website. That's the first time since I became Commissioner on the 1st of March 2010 I've been able to say that. When I started to prepare to speak this morning, I went back into what the bullet points on your agenda may or may not say. I've been asked to talk about engaging with children and young people to champion them and hear their voices, how we support children who are in particular need, especially those with special needs, but not only them. Where are the systems supporting children or letting them down? What does the workforce need to begin to understand about children if we're really going to engage with them as citizens now? And how do we work with schools to reduce the numbers of exclusions which almost inevitably impact on those who are the most vulnerable rather than their compadres? All of those things feature somewhere in the work of my office, and the law says if I find something out, I have to publish it. So if you get onto my website, which we are about to change and make more navigable, at the moment it looks dead child-friendly and it's absolutely hopeless in terms of finding anything, but it won't be soon. It will resemble a Microsoft Windows 8 environment. It will be tiles. It will be go into one link and find 15 others. And everything I say this morning is already published. So we won't be issuing the notes of Maggie's speech from this morning because I'm relying on you to be web users and to find this material because it's copyright free. It will give you ideas about your practice, your localities, your work, your organisations, and we would be delighted to see you use it. Two things that have happened in my recent days to give you a flavour of the sort of things that happened to me before I go into the very short address I'm going to give you this morning. I don't know what's going on in this building, but it would be quite nice if it stopped. This is not Radio 4. We don't need people drilling walls in the middle of the Today programme. Anyway, last week was the European gathering of people who do my job. 28 nations across the European Union and the European Community, some of whom are Eurozone countries and some of whom aren't. It was hosted in Edinburgh, so my knees are still suffering after the Cayley. But all of those nations came together to talk about children in austerity. And one of the things that had happened in preparation for the conference was a creative project with a filmmaker who'd gone round 8 nations, England being one of them, and got 4 filmmakers, 4 young filmmakers who'd never made a film, to make 2-minute either animations or personal testimony type films without speech that were then amalgamated into a Europe-wide collection of 32 films. And we saw them on the first morning. And there were 4 English young filmmakers involved in the work. And one of them, David, and he doesn't mind me sharing his name because he was all over the media last week in Scotland, is a young man from Preston, Lancashire, who is 15 years old now and who happens to have Down syndrome. And he is a Down syndrome sufferer whose speech is very indistinct and hampered by a very severe stammer. And his film was about the cuts in speech and language therapies that were enabling him to drift into the background, or creating him a means of drifting into the background, which sometimes he likes and sometimes he doesn't. But the lack of speech and language therapy services had brought an absolute halt to the development of his speech as a young citizen who wants to have his voice heard. It's a very powerful film. It was one of the ones on which my commissioner colleagues from across Europe commented throughout the week. The other 3 young English filmmakers had made equally poignant films, but David's stands out. And David was interviewed by the Scottish media, who were very patient with him because the manifestation of his speech difficulties was so clear in the ways in which they interviewed him, and he was clearly suffering from what the film portrayed. That is a very powerful metaphor for the ways in which we enable or disable our children from being speakers into the environment in which they live, and about the services that are provided in that environment to enable them to be the best they can be. I was delighted to be there in Edinburgh, not least to meet those young people again, but it was really important for me to come away and make that reflection. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child says children should be, and their best interests must be, at the heart of what you do for them. That's Article 3. You can't pick and choose which articles you fulfil. If they commit a crime, or they are disabled, or they are speechless, or they are poor, or they are immigrants, or they are whoever, you can't withdraw their rights. If they're on your soil, the rights apply. It is a very powerful convention, the UNCRC. It's a very powerful treaty, and it's backed by international law. David, who has a range of disabilities, he has a heart condition as well as Down syndrome, is covered by Article 23 of the UNCRC, which is about disability. Article 23 says, any child with any degree of disability must be supported by the society in which they live to attain all they might and fulfil their potential. And if society has to bend in order to enable that, then society has to bend in order to enable it. So walk with me into the SEN parts of the 2014 Children and Families Act and tell me what you know about the local offer. If you were a parent, how on earth would you navigate it? Who's going to inspect whether an education, health and care plan is worth the paper it's written on? Who's going to inspect and quality assure the value and the brilliance, or otherwise, of the local offer? Given that so far, Ofsted and the CQC have been absolutely silent on both. The Convention guarantees it. The 2014 Children and Families Act SEN sections are written on the premise that if we withdraw statements, because they were about standing in a long queue for 5 hours of extra support at the end of it, and those of us who've worked with them know that, if you replace them with an education, health and care plan, who is going to hold to account? The educators in a diversifying system of schooling, the health system, which for all its glories is trying to save about £40 billion in the next 5 years, and the care system, which is under all sorts of pressure because thresholds rise and referrals rise and numbers of children in the system rise as well. So how do you fulfil Article 23, which is an international promise, through British legislation, which is statutory and binding, when actually what's going on, in my view, since it came into place only 2 weeks ago, is people going, what? It's not fulfilling the rights of the child. How do we move? I'm going to have to leave as Stephen McCabe takes the stage because Sky News want to talk to me about yesterday's UNICEF report, where apparently our statistics on children in austerity and poverty have actually fallen. But if you peg what's happening to the other things that are around children, like benefit changes, like housing changes, like caps on income, like caps on numbers of children you're allowed to have, and then you put all of those in the mix, we are worse off than we were at the start of the recession by around another 600,000 children and young people. It's 2014, we are the world's 5th richest nation. We have 3.5 million children living below the breadline. Article 26 and Article 27 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child are very clear indeed. They are about adequate standard of living, adequate income, and if your standard of living and your income are inadequate, the absolute duty of the state to step in and support you so that you can live a fulfilled life and not be living in a household where you may eat but your parents don't, and you may be warm but any other room in the house is not. We face rights denial wherever we look. Not for all children, not by a long, long way. There are 12 million in England, that's 1 in 4 of the population. But what my office does is to look at and shine a light on the infringement of children's rights, the denial of children's rights, the ignorance of the fact that they have them in the first place. So, Article 12 says, in accordance with their age and stage of maturity, as Naomi referred to in her introductory remarks, all children have the absolute right not only to have their voices heard, but taken seriously in any decision that's made about their lives. So if you work in housing and what you're doing is working with housing associations to move families due to the spare room subsidy stroke bedroom tax, I have to be politically neutral, so I thought I'd say both of those. If you are working in that sector, or you are a school and you have children who are living in housing in that sector, and you know that moves are afoot and the possibility of them no longer being in your catchment area if you're a school or a GP surgery, no longer being in the right catchment area for the relevant social work team or the relevant early years service, and those children have not been asked for their views as part of the mix, then that's a denial of their rights under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. If you work in a school of any sort, mainstream or otherwise, and you are engaged in reviewing statements as they were, education, health and care plans as they will be, and the child is in the corridor playing on a PlayStation or colouring things in, while you're busy having a discussion about the review, you are in denial of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The premise of the UNCRC is you do nothing about me without me. If you work in the care system, and when you do care reviews or placement reviews or fostering reviews, or you're asking about adoption and a child is old enough to express a view and you don't seek it, you are in denial of the rights of the child. It's as simple and as difficult to achieve as that, because whilst most children I've ever met are not asking for the moon on a stick or a 3-ring circus on the village green every 3rd Wednesday with free candy floss, sometimes their views are unrealistic, sometimes their views of what's good for them will actually put them in greater danger, and you can see that as an adult. All I'm asking, and all they will ask, is if the answer has to be no, if I can't be part of my review, if I can't be part of the discussion about where I should go to school, if I can't be part of the discussion about whether or not my family gets to stay in the country, do me the honour and courtesy of treating me as a citizen and explain why. That's what Article 12 requires. That's the "and taken seriously" bit of hear their voice. If we're serious about wanting our children to be citizens, one of the things that we need to do, and the Convention says this very clearly, in the later articles it's very clear. Article 42 says it's the state's responsibility to ensure that children understand both the content of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and what it means for their existence. So if you are an agent of the state, in local government, in a publicly funded school, in a publicly funded health setting, or wherever else, you are part of that endeavour to ensure that children understand their rights. It's as plain as the nose on your face. I would say this, wouldn't I? Because I've been Commissioner since March 2010, and it's therefore like breathing as far as I'm concerned. If you're a stranger to it, Read the summaries that are available on the UNICEF website. It's worth looking at little booklets like this, which simply explain the rights of the child in child-friendly language. You have the right to, you have the right to. It's worth you having a bit of a reflection, because for me they are the strongest potential school rules, youth club rules, cadet group rules you've ever seen, these. Because what children and young people who know about them will tell you is that this is a mutual endeavour. My rights should never deny yours, is what I've heard 6-year-olds say this. My rights should never take your rights away. It's not about me being the boss. It's about all of us understanding that we share these rights together. And therefore, we are part of building this place on the basis of our rights. If they understand their rights as children and young people, they will become the first generation of adults in this country who understand a rights landscape freed of political rhetoric and scaremongering. And the convention is full of freeing us from political rhetoric and scaremongering. The convention talks about the need for children to have access to their friendship group. So the right of association, including teenagers under lampposts with their hoods up, is guaranteed in the United Nations Convention. The right to be with their friends, including in the shopping centre. I was in a big English city not that long ago and talked to the youth assembly in that city, whose young people made it very clear indeed that they were the first to be asked to move on by the security group that was patrolling their shopping mall. They were the first to be moved off the street after dark, despite the fact that the people getting drunk at the cafe tables were all over 18. Their point was, it's all right for you to move us on. Where are we supposed to go and how safe will it be when we get there? They walked me around the streets and showed me the places to which they tend to be moved on. They are not safe, they are ill-lit, they are not near a bus stop, they are very often out of mobile phone coverage, and it's not all right. They've got spending money in their pockets. The possibilities that what they're there in the shopping centre to do is shop seems to kind of escape people. That sense that they are citizens and they have rights is something that we struggle with as a society, and the reports on my website are full of conversations with people about those struggles. So, where do we find our material? Why do we study what we study? What are we looking at now? We were talking about this as we walked down from my office earlier this morning. My office concentrates, by law, on the ones who are likeliest to have their rights denied. I am here for all 12 million. On the 20th of November, you have the chance to run Takeover Day, which is them stepping into the shoes of the decision maker. I've watched sixth formers run a school for a day, meet with the unions, turn up at 6 in the morning, patrol the grounds, not leave till 10 o'clock at night because that's when the yoga group leaves, and so on and so on. I've been taught GCSE English by a Year 8 child on Takeover Day, whose teacher was his classroom support assistant. And debriefing afterwards had the child say, I'm never going to mess about again. I've missed all my football for 6 weeks to do this. And the teacher say, aren't they amazing? Aren't they flexible? I've learned so much by watching his teaching style because he sees 10 a week and I only see mine. It was remarkable, and Takeover Day always is, and it's all on my website. Loads of materials, shell copy of press releases and shell copy of letters to parents for permission. All you need to do is be brave enough to step into the space. Museums do it, galleries do it, trade unions do it, MPs and ministers do it, elected and unelected mayors do it, police chiefs do it, fire chiefs do it, so should you. And if you don't do it this year, give a present to my successor for their first year when they do it next November. What is it that we learn when we go and talk to the most marginalised children and young people? We learn that they very often have the remedies for their own difficulties, at least in part, in their own hands. They understand and are expert in their conditions. Children who are poor know what it is like to live in a family where you are one paycheck away from eviction. You are certainly not going to be able to afford to go on a school trip. You are likely, if you are disabled, to live in extreme indignity because disability is expensive. And they will tell you if you give them the space to do it. We've worked on some very, very delicate issues in my office, child sexual exploitation among them. Our indicators of a child either being already a victim or likely and at risk of being a victim are on my website. You can download them and use them. What are the signs you should be looking for? They've been shared and better shared in the last 12 months. Who's turning up with 2 mobile phones, sleepy, dishevelled, but wearing a lot of jewellery? Who's turning up when they feel like it, or when they don't feel like it, they're turning up and being really angry? Who's turning up with unexplained injuries, particularly personal and intimate injuries, at A&E, at GP surgeries? It's on my website. It's based on evidence from every police service in the country, every local authority in the country, and at least half of health authorities in the country. It's not out of the air, it's based on evidence. We've done the same on school exclusions, and here's the evidence, and this is government numbers. You are 3 times likelier to be excluded as a boy than a girl. If you're a poor boy, you are 8 times likelier than your affluent girl classmate. If you are a poor black boy, you are 33 times more likely than your white affluent girl classmate. If you are a poor black boy with special educational needs from a Caribbean background, here's the killer. You are 168 times likely to be excluded from school than your white, female, affluent, average ability classmate. That is not about the boy. If you've got special needs, you are likelier than anybody else in your cohort to be illegally excluded. That's the casual, tell you what, you're having a bit of a bad day, why don't you go home for the afternoon? Or, well, we don't do diabetes, so can your mum come? Or, don't you think it'd be better if you looked for another school somewhere else? And we won't write it down because it'll be on your record if we do. My question, if you're a head teacher, is what are you putting on your register about that child? Because if you're writing educated elsewhere, or electively home educated, you're not committing a civic offence, you're committing fraud. And if I find out about it, I will tell your local police service and I will tell Ofsted. Because that's my job. It's my job to stand for the rights of the child. How do we stop children being excluded? We saw fantastic practice in my inquiry on this issue. We saw schools that were co-educating children and young people across their patch. Academy chains and local authority maintained schools who were absolutely with the endeavour of consuming the smoke of the difficult child and giving everybody a fresh start, staff and pupils alike. We saw small group teaching, we saw de-escalation, we saw restorative justice, and that's on my website as well. We've done an awful lot of work on asylum, on refugee children, on how better to serve their needs, on how better to treat them with dignity, and that's on my website as well. And we've changed government policy as a result of some of the work we've done. If you Google Children's Commissioner, it's us that comes up. If you Google Children's Commissioner and you want something and you look in our publications section, we've done work on parental alcohol misuse, the voice of the child in difficult health circumstances. I've done work with young carers. It's there. What does the workforce need? And then I'm going to stop. The workforce needs to understand that children do not come out of a hermetically sealed bubble called family and into a hermetically sealed bubble called school or health centre or youth club. They come with the same baggage in their young lives as no doubt you carry in yours. If they're sad or furious, if something awful has happened at home and they don't want to tell anybody about it, if they do want to tell somebody about it and nobody's listening, it will come out in their behaviours. It will come out in the way they approach you as an adult. If you're a teacher and you don't understand child development, attachment theory, social development, social dynamics, family dynamics, somebody somewhere needs to help you to do that understanding. If you're a social worker and you do not understand antenatal and immediate postnatal child development, you do not understand attachment in the early days of life, you do not understand the antagonism and aggression that will follow if a child feels not anchored, somebody somewhere has to help you to understand those things. The same is true if you're a nurse or a paediatrician. We need a workforce that understands childhood because we've forgotten our own. But it isn't actually about us. It is not about us, it's about them. Somebody gave me my chances, somebody helped me to be the person I am. We owe it to children and young people to do that. And now I've got about 5 minutes for questions. Have I?
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Perfect.